Joining me right now is the man who first alerted the public to the probability that COVID-19 escaped from the Wuhan lab on this program back in March of 2020. Arkansas Senator Tom Cotton is here. He sits on the Senate Armed Services and Intelligence Committees. And Senator, it's always a pleasure. Thanks very much for being here.
Thank you, Maria. It's good to be back on with you.
Do you expect the president to sign that bill to declassify the intelligence around COVID-19?
I do think he'll sign it, Maria. I suspect they're trying to get their ducks in a row on what they will and will not release. But what I can tell you is the observations I made on your show now 3 years ago and ever since then have been based not really on any kind of classified intelligence, but just common sense and the facts in front of our faces. I think any farmer or trucker in Arkansas with an ounce of common sense would tell you this virus almost certainly came from those labs. And a large majority of Americans now believe that as well. The Biden administration simply doesn't want to align itself with that view. They want to continue to stress the uncertainty or the lack of direct evidence, which we may never have because China has covered it up, because they don't want to be forced to take action to hold China accountable for unleashing this plague on the world.
Right. And that the question continues to be why? Why not? So now we have our adversaries on the move, Xi Jinping meeting with Putin tomorrow. Your thoughts on this meeting?
Well, unfortunately, Maria, Joe Biden has put a kick me sign on Uncle Sam's back. When America recedes from the world, it creates a void of leadership, and it's not filled with peace and stability and understanding. It's filled with our adversaries working against our interest, whether it's Russia or China or Iran or North Korea. So many countries are questioning whether America is going to continue to lead the civilized world to protect our own interests and protect international stability and order that gives Americans the blessings of safety and freedom and prosperity. I think what is particularly dangerous in this upcoming meeting is whether China commits to provide weapons to Russia to continue its unprovoked war of aggression in Ukraine. I don't think the Biden administration has been nearly strong enough in outlining to China the consequences of such a serious action.
Yeah, and at the same time, we've got an economy that is weakening and weakening fast. Byron Donalds just told me that they are going to hold hearings this week in the House about what the heck happened with Silicon Valley Bank. And I want to get your take on the FDIC securing all of the deposits of that bank, including, importantly, many companies that are based in China that were clients of Silicon Valley Bank. Now they're saying, look, we can't secure all the deposits everywhere, but they were very fast to come to the rescue of Silicon Valley Bank, even with those clients from China. I wonder if it would have been the same treatment if this was a bank in Texas with clients that were oil companies or oil, trading firms.
Well, Maria, just to ask the question, I think, is carrying with it its own answer. I think it's obvious to everyone that Joe Biden would not have bailed out a bank in, say, Midland, Texas, that banked almost exclusively the oil and gas industry. The failure of Silicon Valley Bank and the stress it's put on our banking sector and the economy really is Joe Biden's failures all the way down. It was Joe Biden's reckless spending that created runaway inflation, which led to higher interest rates, which put the squeeze on banks like Silicon Valley Bank. And it was Joe Biden's administration that didn't properly oversee and supervise a bank like Silicon Valley Bank 6 months ago or a year ago to ensure that they were doing proper risk management of the interest rate spreads between their deposits on the one hand and their assets on the other hand. Or for that matter, who last week didn't help arrange for a shotgun wedding merger with a larger bank with a more stable balance sheet, probably because they're ideologically opposed to any kind of merger. So what we got instead was the Biden bank bailout, which will, in fact, be going to Chinese companies because it's well known that Silicon Valley Bank was an access point for Chinese companies to get American money. And when you have one of these bank failures, foreign depositors are supposed to be in line behind American depositors. Yet the Biden administration confirmed to me on a conference call last week about this situation that they are, in fact, going to make whole Chinese depositors, probably on the fig leaf that they have, a single American cosigner, most likely at the very venture capital firms that were funneling money into these Chinese companies in the first place, companies that are almost certainly, in most cases, aligned with the Chinese Communist Party or the People's Liberation Army.
This is just extraordinary, Senator. I mean, truly extraordinary. And we also have some of these companies going public and getting money from individual investors in America. Are we not funding the expansion of the CCP, who continues to be a rising enemy and adversary of America?
Well, unfortunately, Maria, that's a story of American policy failures going back 30 years. It's been American investors and American companies encouraged by our government to help fund the rise of China's economy, which, of course, fuels the People's Liberation Army and their intelligence services. I have a very simple test I'd like to propose. If we wouldn't have done it with Russian communists, we shouldn't do it with Chinese communists. And none of what we've done in the last 30 years would we have ever done with Russia during the Cold War. We certainly shouldn't be continuing to do it with China now.
Yeah, and I want to talk about this potential Forbes acquisition by the Sun Group. This Sun Group has ties to the Russian government and Vladimir Putin. They want to acquire Forbes and their collection and storage of sensitive data on millions of Americans. You stopped a deal from Communist China acquiring Forbes, right?
I did. Last summer, it came to our attention that Chinese-linked companies were trying to acquire Forbes, a flagship American media brand. Of course, they were going to use that for their own propaganda purposes. I and a few other senators pressured the Secretary of Treasury and the Biden administration to block that deal. It fell apart. Now you have Russia-aligned companies trying to buy Forbes as well. We're going to put the exact same pressure on the Biden administration to stop this deal from going forward. As I said, if we wouldn't allow Russian communists to do it, we shouldn't allow Chinese communists to do it. That works in reverse as well. We would never in a million years during the Cold War have allowed Pravda to get a foothold in America's media environment. We shouldn't allow Russia-aligned investors to buy a flagship American media brand.
Senator, thank you very much. Tom Cotton will be watching your leadership. We so appreciate your time, sir.